Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Allen. With me, as always, my good friend, Rod the Pod Zabriskie. And we're going to have a really special Rod the Pod moment today, Rod. I didn't even ask you, but I was kind enough to assign you a new segment today. I'm excited about it. It's going to be the Pod's perspective. And since the pod is Rod, we're going to hear Rod the Pod's perspective on some really important stuff. How does that sound?
I am excited. You gave me a hint. I don't know what's coming necessarily, but he did mention that. So
okay, but it's fun. We have a new pod perspective, and just for clarity, so in case anyone's questioning this, the pod is both the pod and Rod. You see that? That's a double meaning. It's a double meaning. And just in case anyone wasn't picking up on it. So I find that people don't know when I say something funny unless I tell them that it's funny. So that's my attempt here, is to let them know that this was a funny thing that you should be picking up. Okay, Rod, today we're talking about what happens when a deal goes bad, specifically what happens to the investment optimizer and your overall strategy when a deal goes bad. Because guess what? A lot of people have, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, especially in the multifamily space, lived this experience where all the deals weren't going as well. And so what happens if I have my deals directly connected to my policy? Well, we're going to get into some of the details on that. And Rod, we're uniquely qualified because while we understand the philosophy, and obviously we teach this every day, all day, we also live the experience. So we've talked about the ATM deal pretty openly. We put a good chunk of money in that, and we did borrow it from a policy that we own jointly. And guess what? We don't have the money to repay it. So we'll talk about how Rod and I are navigating that terrain. Okay. So maybe to kick things off, Rod, I want to talk about the investment optimizer and focus on it primarily as a strategy, more so than anything else, as a foundational asset that we can use as a strategy. Now, before I do that, I forgot about one really, really important element. Today's pod, I've got to give Wayne a shout out. Today's pod was inspired by Wayne, and he was kind enough after our last podcast, which was, I think it was 8 things we wish every investor knew about high cash value life insurance. And he wrote in and he said, I'm going to skip down a little bit. Okay. He says, a lot of your focus is on using these high cash value policies as a quote unquote investment optimizer. In much of your conversations, there is an implicit assumption that the investments are successful. I think it would be helpful to talk about what happens when you've used a policy to invest in and the investment doesn't work out as planned. So, and then he goes in and shares some of his experiences. In this case, the real estate challenge would also have created a challenge for the policy, amplifying the effect of the negative investment. And then he says, I think this is where the rubber meets the road when using these policies as long-term optimizers. Okay, I totally agree. And I think that it's an absolutely fair point, because most of the time we are walking into this assuming that investments go right. And I should say, hopefully most of our investments do go right.
Right, yeah.
But the reality is a lot of us who've been investing over the last 10, 15 years have seen a lot of good times, but we've also, likely seen some blips on the radar along the way. So we're going to make sure that we tackle how we kind of think of that framework and how to make sure that we're doing the right thing so that it doesn't end up blowing up our entire system, right? And it doesn't have to. Just there's a heads up. As long as we put the pieces in the right way, we can very easily navigate these waters, because there's so much flexibility that's built right into the structure of what we're doing. Okay, so let's set the stage, Rod. How is the investment optimizer the foundational asset? Maybe talk a little bit about that, and then we'll start getting into, some of the specific points that people need to be thinking about. For example, they have to make sure that the loan and the deal are separated. But talk about how the investment optimizer acts as that foundational asset.
Yeah, so maybe I'll speak about it personally, because the way I use my investment optimizer policy is that's where I want to put all the money that I'm going to go out and invest somewhere else, right?
Okay,
And
that's
so
important. That's important. And I'm going to stop you there. So now we have this initial, what Rod's saying is he's now taken out other places that he would use to invest money. He's saying, I'm not going to go from my bank account to my investment or any other place to my investment. I'm going to attempt to the extent possible. And we know it's not possible to do it completely, but he's then going to take it, put it into the policy, then invest it. Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that foundation exists, because we're not talking about just taking like necessarily like a little chunk of our money and putting it. We're literally trying to create this synergistic, I'm trying, like, I have this view of like the star, like the solar system and all working together. And that's kind of what my head says this is supposed to look like. So again, we're thinking about the foundational asset being that policy, but it's going to literally optimize everything that we're doing if, and to the extent we can fund the money through there before we put it out and deploy it into other investors. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and so maybe the reason why you're saying if is because when we set up a policy, we're creating parameters around that, right? And so my idea is, well, I'm going to be setting aside X amount per year for my investing anyway. I'll put it in the policy first. And so when I set up a policy, I create what we call a funding range. We often use the example, if I have $100,000 is my target amount I want to put in, and then we'll set that as the maximum end of the range, and then bottom end of the range might be 25,000, right? So my range every year in that example, I can put it anywhere between 25 as a minimum up to 100,000 a year as a max. I'm only maxed out because of the IRS, right? The tax rules and that kind of stuff built around it. We won't get into a lot of detail there, but if you're wondering, well, why does there have to be a max? Well, the max exists because we also want to take advantage of the tax advantages that are out there by putting money into a policy and letting it grow and be accessible without having to pay tax on the gains, right? So that's why there's that kind of max exists. So it becomes that foundational piece because that money is going in there, not to stay there, like you said, but to be then used. I'm leveraging against that to go out and invest in something. When I do that, and that investment creates some sort of cash flow or returns coming back to me, however that works out based on the investment, I'll flow that all back to the policy, kind of recapture all those gains. It's technically speaking paying down that loan, but strategically I think of it like it's replenishing my opportunity fund, because now I'm going to go build that back up and go invest in something else. So my first investment stays there and continues to live out its cycle, right? It might be a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year cycle or whatever. It's going to continue to live that out. I'll continue to capture the gains from that. But now I'm going out and investing something else. And now I have a cycle coming from that investment. And then I'll go out and do a third investment, et cetera. So over time, I'm building out my investment portfolio, all of that flowing through my investment optimizer.
I love it. And this is also a super important point, because we want to emphasize that the investment optimizer doesn't need to be, and ideally wouldn't be, tied directly to a single investment. Okay. So when we teach the concept, we're trying to emphasize and teach the fact that we can create additional return on our investments. So we typically use an example of an investment doing that, right?
Yeah.
You know, we oftentimes will show like over a period of doing several, like how that works out. But I think what happens is people automatically just connect it to one investment. They think, okay, well, I'm borrowing from my policy for this investment, therefore these two things are inherently tied together, right? And what we're trying to suggest at this foundational element, or the foundational piece, is that we need to flow the money in there so that we can disperse in multiple places, right?
Yeah.
Because the issue, the concern comes when I have my investment only and exclusively tied to one direct deal. Then suddenly, if everything blows up, now where am I at? Now, and I think that's kind of the mental shift that people have to start making. The policy and the investment shouldn't be tied together singularly. The policy should be funding all of our investments. And therefore, when we come into situations where things don't go as well as we hope, we can just pull from other places to bring in. So for example, we're going to get into the importance of making sure we actually pay the loan interest, right? Because we're going to ask the question, well, what do we do if the deal goes bad? How's that going to affect the investment optimizer? Well, the natural thought process here, and Wayne's thought is, okay, if I have this deal tied to it, now suddenly not only is the investment deal not going well, but my policy has a loan out on it. Is it running into a difficult situation? Talk about just kind of your thoughts on that, Rod, and then I'll keep going down this rabbit hole.
My initial thought is that that's money I was going to go and invest in that deal anyway. I never wanted it to go bad, but it did, right? I also have the cash value in my policy that's acting as collateral for that loan. So the one thing that I can at least take some comfort in is that, yes, I have a loan outstanding, but it's fully collateralized, right? That asset didn't go anywhere. It stayed there, continued doing its thing, acting as collateral. And to your comment earlier, I now have options I can consider. And one of those options could be, well, I'll just take from the cash value and use that to pay off the loan. And now I no longer have the loan sitting there anymore, right? So now, again, we're going to talk about if I'm using it to invest in multiple places. Well, I'll put it this way. I've never seen a situation where that was the best option, to take the cash value and pay off the loan. But for anyone going into it, if you have that concern, well, what am I going to do if the deal goes bad? Well, no, that's always an option.
Yep. Okay. So the starting point is, in order to make sure the system never goes bad, we think of the investment optimizer as kind of that central hub, right? The money is flowing through there, no different than I would a bank account or anything else. The thing that people don't realize is that because of the way we fund the policies, and oftentimes because they're structured to be funded so much right up front, we can create a huge amount of flexibility in the policy from day one to the extent. So the issue then becomes, well, what if I take out a max loan to fund my deal? It goes bad, and now I don't have that loan money to come back. Well, the challenge is again, if I'm tied to one singular deal, I could be in a difficult position. But if I'm funding multiple deals in different places, now I'm just taking from different places to go and take care of like the loan interest, for example. So in our situation, we had the ATM deal go bad. We have a $150,000 loan there. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we still, just because we don't have the cash flow coming from the policy, or excuse me, the cash flow coming from the investment back from the ATM fund, we still want to make sure that the policy doesn't compound in interest. So what do? We make sure we just pay the interest on it. And by doing that, the asset stays very stable, even if I have a large loan on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the other thing that I think people need to make sure they understand is, because of the way that we structure these, and especially as the policy gets more mature, I have the ability to hold out on a large loan without it having a seriously negative impact on the policy. Maybe you can talk a little bit about I'm going to wait till the pod's perspective before I get into that question.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we emphasize that. So let's get into this concept that the loan is not the deal. Rod, talk about it.
Yeah. So it's a line of credit, right? I have cash value that allows me to access this line of credit from the insurance company or from a bank, right? We talk about, you could have a different lender, but we'll just talk about it from the insurance company. So when I take a loan, let's just say I have $100,000 of cash value. I want to go invest in a $25,000 syndication or something. I take the $25,000 loan against the $100,000, go invest in it. 6 months later, I take another $25,000, go invest in something else. So while the loan is tied to the money I used for the deal, it's all just one loan balance, right? So let's say the first investment that I put into was a good cash flowing investment. It's creating a 8%, 10% cash flowing return coming back to me. And let's just say it's 10, just to use really round numbers. And then the second one, let's say that it's not. Maybe it's going to take time. It's the kind of investment that takes 18 months for them to refurbish the property before it's going to create any kind of cash flow, right? is that appropriate for the investment optimizer? Well, it is in this case because my first investment is creating 10% cash flow coming back to me. That's enough to cover the 5% for it and the 5% interest for this second one that I took. So without doing anything different, just with the flow that I've already created with those two investment deals, I'm covering the interest. I don't have to worry about it compounding on me. Right. So that's most often that's what we see is just, I'm using the example of two investments as my policy value continues to grow, as my investment portfolio continues to grow, it develops into multiple different things coming through because I'm diversifying the way I invest and the way that the investment returns come back to me. Then it just creates a situation where I can cover those things. In fact, I invest in things that don't create cash flow in and of themselves, but that's okay because they're covered. I'm still paying down those loans using the cash flow from the rest of the different things that I'm investing in.
Yeah. So the thing that I keep hearing is, again, that my individual deals are not necessarily, like, I'm not tying one deal to it. People sometimes don't realize that I could have a dozen different loans out on $1 million or a couple $1 million cash value policy, right? I could have loans doing a lot of different things. And that's that's the differentiator. It becomes difficult for the concept to work exclusively in a vacuum if I have an unsuccessful deal and it's only one of them. But again, if I have many deals, it just highlights the importance of diversifying. So, for example, if I have $100,000 to invest, I should probably not. And this has nothing to do with the investment optimizer. This is just basic, financial wisdom. If I have $100,000 to invest, I probably shouldn't invest all $100,000 into a singular deal, right? It would be wiser for me to take that and break it up over 2 or 3 or 4 deals, however that works. Because again, by putting it all in one place at one time, I'm suddenly creating a whole lot more risk. Even if I have more opportunity for reward, you have to ask yourself the question, is the risk of that potentially not going well? But here's the thing I want to emphasize. It wouldn't matter whether you have the policy loan or not in that situation. If you just put all your money in one deal and it goes bad, that's going to be problematic for you. So that, again, instead of thinking of it in that silo or in that vacuum, we need to think of it as really part of a structured system where the policy acts as the foundation and it funds multiple investments so that when something goes bad, that's not an issue, right? And again, we're living this situation today. We have one deal that goes bad, but we have lots of other things that are going well. And by the way, it doesn't have to be other investments that are going well. It could be your business or your income, right? The fact is that any stuff that's coming into your financial world should play into the overall strategy. So here's what I wouldn't do. Let's just say theoretically, I'm a high income earner. I'm making $750,000 a year. And let's say I funded my policy, right? So I fund my policy in the first year. I go out immediately, 30 days later, 60 days later after I fund it, I go and I use it to purchase some sort of investment opportunity, right? Let's say that investment goes bad immediately. Now suddenly I'm stuck with a choice, right? I could just say, hey, you know what I'm going to do? Because the deal's gone bad and I don't have money to then go back and repay back my loan, I'm going to then compound the problem by letting my policy lapse. That's not what I would do, right? My point here is to suggest there's really easy solutions. I can use my income to make sure I cover the interest and cover the base premium just so I keep my foundational asset moving. It doesn't take a lot. Like, it just takes the early funding. That's critical. But once I've done that early funding, there is a myriad of ways that I can handle these kind of situations. Some of them could just be letting things defer. Sometimes I could let things defer for years and years, right? Or it could just be as simple as picking from an investment that is performing, or just taking my income until I can create the right solution to get things back on a track that feels comfortable and works for me. So again, I just want to emphasize, like, it's about the system. It can't be about the deal directly and only correlating with one investment. Okay, Rod, talk about why diversification is so important and the need for liquidity.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you gave a really good example of no matter what, I'm going to pick a single investment as a starting point. So I'm not diversified when I have one investment. But to your point, I can't use all my cash for that one investment because I need to become diversified, find other deals after that, keep the liquidity on hand to be able to do that. Because, well, maybe flip it on the other side. Say, okay, let's say I made the first investment and now I'm not really finding anything that I'm get excited about. I need to maintain the liquidity because if the one deal, something happens, or they have a capital call or something coming back, well, I need the liquidity to do it, right?
Yeah.
But then as I build out and have other opportunities, now I'm quote unquote eating up my liquidity, but I'm diversifying. And in your kind of hypothetical scenario right there, you're $750,000 income earner, you're setting aside $200,000 a year. Well, you're going to earn that income. You're going to put the next $200,000 in the following year. And now you have a bigger bucket, more investment funds, more liquidity that then lets you take that next step, move to that next stage.
And when I fund the policy, each time that I fund it, I'm funding like the way, just going kind of back to basics here. We always structure these so that they're max funded, which just means that I'm basically funding multiple years at one time. Typically, it's going to be like a 3 to 4 year that I can cover in 1 year at a time. And so what happens then is by doing that, I create a tremendous amount of just flexibility. So even if the first deal, let's say that I put a couple $100,000 in and maybe a deal doesn't go well. Well, when I put the next 200,000 in, I'm still creating a significant amount of additional flexibility within the policy, along with like just kind of continuing to build the base, the foundational asset. So I think that's important. The policy, and this is one of those misnomers out there. We talked about it on the last podcast, but whole life insurance sometimes is suggested as if it has very low flexibility, right? And the irony to that is that it's, and I should clarify, because of the way that we fund it, it actually becomes the most flexible, right? And I would say that it's even more flexible in many ways than what I can do with universal life, because again, we're funding it so well right up front. We just suddenly change the game altogether. Those typical whole life rules aren't things that we're running up against anymore.
Yep. Totally agree. And these are the kinds of things that people, if you go down to your local insurance agent down the street and you try to describe to them exactly what Christian just did, a lot of them don't even know that exists. Because if they're approaching it from a pure life insurance standpoint, not overfunding, don't understand how that works, whatever, they don't know the flexibility you can create in a whole life. So even those who seemingly know the most about it, in the context of what we're talking about, they don't.
That's a super important point. So just, you got to know who to listen to and who not to. And that can be a little bit convoluted, but if you're focused on investing and if you're focused on max funding, just know that by doing that, you're creating a huge amount of flexibility that gives you a lot of freedom to maneuver in and out of these situations while still letting that underlying asset do its thing. Like, it doesn't have to be disruptive any more than it would be like, obviously an investment deal going bad is disruptive. But what I'm trying to suggest here is it doesn't need to be any more disruptive inside the policy than it would be if I was doing it outside of it. If I've structured it as a system, as part of my overall plan, then it becomes really easy to navigate that situation by looking for other asset classes to basically pull in when and if that situation comes up. But I want to talk about, Rod, like specifically some of the like detailed challenges that you might run into as it relates to the policy. So we've talked about our ATM deal, like, right, we're living this experience. As we talked about, we're making sure that we pay interest, but a lot of times we get questions that are even more detailed than that. And so I want to hit on this question of, and let me give you the hypothetical. That's probably the better way to do it. So I wish I had I need a sound effect that tells us we're moving into the pod's perspective, but this is it. We're about to get to pod's perspective. So let's say, Rod, I have invested in a deal. It didn't go well. Let's say that I did have it directly connected, and I've got other stuff going on, but let's just say in my head, it's kind of directly connected. Now, I've put in 100,000. I borrowed 75,000 to go and get into a deal, right? 6 months later, the deal suddenly has gone bad. Now I've got to figure out what to do very specifically with the policy. So from a policy mechanic standpoint, what are my options and what should I be doing? And we're talking specifically to Wayne here. What does Wayne need to do to navigate the situation that he's in?
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to do is think about the different elements of the policy. So let's say that happened, the deal went belly up, and now I'm coming up on my policy anniversary date, right?
Yes.
Well, I receive a notice in the mail from my insurance company, and they say, hey, based on this policy you set up, you were planning to put in $200,000 of new money into this policy, and you have a $75,000 outstanding loan balance with the 6 months of interest being whatever, $3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that's right, but just pulling it off the top of my head. Anyway, so $3,000 of interest is due. And of the 200,000, that breaks into two different pieces. You have I talked about the funding range earlier, right? I gave an example of 25 as a minimum up to 100. In this case, the funding range would be basically about 50 as a minimum up to 200,000 as a max. The 50 represents what we call the base premium. That's more tied to the kind of pure insurance part of it. The other 150,000 is what's called paid up additions, totally optional. I can choose to put that money in or I cannot. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here I am, the investment just went defunct. Now I'm sitting here looking at this paper that says, oh, you said you're going to put 200,000 in. So do I have to put 200,000 in, Christian?
No, you do not.
No, I do not. Okay. So number one, I have a lot of flexibility there. So let's just say,
and I do think that's important because when people are hearing that, oftentimes, and again, we try to educate. We push this point so much, like the flexibility that's built on the front end through the funding range concept gives us again flexibility. I keep saying the word over and over. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Like the irony here is just that it's typically the opposite of what people think. And so, yes, to your point, I don't have to put the whole 200,000 in. To be honest with you, I don't have to put a dime in necessarily, depending on the situation.
Yeah, we'll hit on that. So breaking that 200 into the 50 that's the base plus the PUA, the 150 completely optional. I can forget about that for now. Pretend it doesn't exist. I can feel at ease on that. Now look at the 50. Technically speaking, inside the policy, I need to pay that, right? To cover my kind of minimum commitment for that year. But I have different options. I can break it into semi-annual, quarterly, monthly chunks. Mm-hmm. So then the question is, okay, in this kind of tight spot that I'm in, am I still working? Do I have income? If so, great. Then I can cover that and do it. But let's say not. Let's say for whatever reason, I need to break that up. Well, can I pay whatever, $4,200 a month? In my experience, as I'm talking to people who had the wherewithal to put in
to be able to do it in the first place,
they're $4,000 a month.
Yeah, most of the time people aren't accredited they come in with a strong income, they start investing in alternatives, and suddenly they've lost their job and investments are going belly up at the same time. Yes, it could happen, but typically there's a workaround here.
Yes. And so then that gets to, well, let's say that the answer was no. Okay, I can't even come up with the $4,200 a month to cover that minimum. Then I would say, okay, well, you were smart because you'd put the 200 in. You took a $75,000 investment or loan for your investment, but you left liquidity in there. Well, we can use that liquidity as a backup to cover that minimum.
Yeah, and I do think that one's critical. So we talked about diversification and how that's really important, and that's just important anyway, right? And again, not for the sake of diversifying, but intentional diversification across asset classes makes a ton of sense. Inside our policy, as much sense as it makes to be diversified, it makes equal sense to make sure that I have cash on hand. So what we tell people is don't use up all of your liquidity, right? And that just is, again, this has nothing to do with the investment optimizer. This is just a principle that I need to know. If I'm going to become a prolific wealth builder, I have to make sure I have dry powder, because things can happen, things go bad. Now, where I hold that, that's up to you. But a really great place to hold it is in a place like the investment optimizer, where it's getting 5 or 6% on a tax-free basis. So again, regardless of whether an investment deal goes bad that was borrowed against from the loan or from the policy or not, that shouldn't have any impact on the overall importance of being diversified and making sure that I'm leaving liquidity.
Yep, for sure. So getting back to our scenario here, I've ticked off the first item on the list. I need to make sure I cover that base premium, and I figured out how I'm going to do that, right? Whether it was the monthly or whether it was using my cash value to cover it. I've decided how to cover that.
You were saying there's a few ways then. Did we talk about using your cash value to cover it?
Yes. That was my backup plan. If I couldn't come up with
that was the backup plan. Okay.
Minimum.
So the first thing that we do is we cover it with in some other place within our financial world. That would be the ideal, right? And particularly what we want to do is cover any interest, and then we want to try to cover base premium. If that ends up not being an option, you talked about breaking it up and making it systematic over a period of time so that it's not, some bombshell that we're having to deal with in that singular moment.
Yep.
And then if that's not working, good news, I can actually use the cash value, what's in the policy, to pay that base premium. And I have to emphasize this. The base premium, this is super important for people to understand. The base premium does not mean cost. It does not mean cost. So when I put if $50,000 is my base premium, the majority of that is going to pay to build cash value. There is a portion of it that is cost. And then the PUAs is like basic. There's an even smaller portion of that paid up addition that's cost. But the point is, I don't have to feel bad about covering the base premium still, because the majority of that is just landing back in my cash value anyway. Okay, keep going, Rob.
It's a great point, because it's kind of funny to think about, right? I'm using this in our hypothetical example. Let's say I have whatever $90,000 still sitting in my cash value, and I still have the full 165, right? That's in my cash value, but 75 of it is collateralized for that loan that I took. So I still have 90 that's not collateralized. I can pull from that. They pull 50 out of my cash value to cover that, and then 35 or 40 of it lands right back in the cash value, right? It's the nut that has to be cracked, but most of it's going back in the cash value anyway. So that's a great point. So that's the first thing. I checked that off my list. The next thing I'm going to move to, I'm skipping over the paid up additions. We already talked about that. I'm not ready to address that right now. Next, I'm going to look at the $3,000 of interest that's due on my loan that is now representing by this defunct, deal. So how am I going to pay that? I don't have to. So one thing I think that a lot of people don't understand is if I didn't pay it, it wouldn't be great, right? I would have some compounding.
It becomes a regular compounded loan. If I don't pay the interest, that's what happens. Pretty simple.
But there are no additional penalties.
Penalty. It's just like any other loan at that point.
Yep, exactly. So people worry about that. Am I going to get penalized? Is it going to go against my credit? Like, none of those things are going to happen. They'll just roll the $3,000 onto my loan. Now, instead of a $75,000 loan, I have a $78,000 loan. And that's not ideal, but it's possible, right? If I'm just in that cash crunch, I don't have $3,000 that I want to pull from anywhere else to cover that, then I can allow that to happen. And again, not ideal, but it is okay.
Yeah. Well, again, when losing or having a deal go bad is not ideal, right? Any way you shake it. But in a situation like this, again, we're just suggesting there's relatively easy ways to not have it impact the policy in a more negative way than it would if I didn't have it. Yep. And that's what we're talking about here.
Yep. And so I can carry that interest and let it compound. Hopefully it's a short period of time, maybe a few months, and then I can pull from my income, or I can do something else and cover that. But the good news is that I have that flexibility. I have that option.
Sorry.
No worries. So I said, I have that option.
Yes, you have that option, Rod. Okay, good. And it's an important distinction because, again, most people don't realize that there are a lot of options. And that's, I think, one of the things that we're emphasizing, right? Optionality, flexibility. Those are the things that are making. Can I also just say this? Like, part of the reason that we use this strategy, that we believe in it so much, is because it's multifaceted, right? While yes, it can improve, like it can enhance the return on investments, like that in and of itself may or may not be enough, right? The fact that we have this, the flexibility that we can create with it, the combination of those things is what makes it work and create an actual system that's functioning. So again, maybe the default that people typically have is, oh, I'm worried about all of the red tape I have to run through, when in reality, the funny thing is you said this on the last pod, but most people, after they've had policies for a while, they're like, oh, I didn't realize how flexible this actually is. We can go and do a lot of different things to match the life and the situation and the financial situation that person's dealing with in that moment.
Yeah. And this hypothetical scenario was obviously an extreme situation, right? The idea that the investment would go defunct and I don't have the money that I was otherwise going to have to invest or to continue putting into the policy to go out and invest in other deals, etc. Like,
right,
it doesn't
because
often happen that all falls apart at the same time, but even if it does, we've just created a scenario where you're going to be fine,
where we can navigate it.
Yeah.
So the more likely scenario is that a deal goes bad, but I still have the $200,000 that I was going to be investing. Well, what do? I take off a little bit of that money to cover the interest on my loan. Maybe I pay the base premium, and then the rest goes in just like it would have otherwise. And just by doing that, I'm still going to be creating that additional value that I would have created. And I now have I've diverged one singular investment from being tied directly to the investment optimizer strategy.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking at it more holistically.
Yep. Because then you're going to go and invest in a few other things that hopefully now will be successful, create that cash flow. And over time, you can use that to now pay down the 75. So that over time, what we more often find is people have the opposite problem. They have more cash flow coming than they can fit into their policy. They end up starting up a new policy to increase their capacity to capture all those dollars. So the idea that I'm going to have the cash flow to pay off that $75,000 investment that went bad, that's never going to create any value for me, but I can kind of refill the bucket as it relates to that money from the other investments.
Okay, Rod, I do have one more question I want to add to the pod's perspective segment. But before I do that, do you feel like we've adequately answered Wayne's question? Like, basically, what do I do? What happens to the investment optimizer if the deal goes bad? And maybe give us like a simplified recap just to that specific question.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope we have, because there are, number one, it's in your expectations coming into the plan and understanding the flexibility that exists so that you can have realistic expectations, right? And then secondly, it's sequencing your steps to be in a place where it's okay. Even if, like you said earlier, even if that was still the first investment that I made from a loan for my policy, but I didn't max out the loan, I didn't lose my job and all these other things at the same time. I was just being smart about the way I invest, having liquidity, sequencing things so that I become diversified, then I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So while it could be problematic, I think the biggest point here is that it doesn't have to be. And again, the further I get into it, the longer I'm using the structure, the system, it becomes less and less of a challenge to navigate, right? So once I'm to the point where I have many different investments being funded by, millions of dollars within my policy, suddenly one investment deal doesn't have the same impact. But again, this is true. This point is true regardless of whether the policy exists or not. And so the biggest point here is the policy should enhance the things that we're doing. And if we look at it systematically and we make the adjustments when we need to, it doesn't have to have any type of negative impact on the policy itself. It's not going to have it on ours. And so, Wayne, to answer your question, it doesn't have to happen to yours either. Okay. The last question I want to ask, Rod, this is one we get all the time. You answer it a lot, but I'm going to make you answer it again. Let's say money's tight, Rod. If money's tight, do you pay your loan interest first, or do you fund the PUAs, and why? What is Rod the Pod's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is that in normal circumstances, I'm going to put money into the paid up additions first. So
interesting.
Think of it this way. Let's just say a hypothetical example. Let's say I have a $100,000 loan outstanding and $100,000 that I can put in towards my paid up additions, but I have something that comes to me, it's 50 grand, a liquidity event, or I had a bonus, something. So I have now 50 grand in my hands. I'm looking at my policy online and it says you owe $100,000 in your loan and you have 100,000 you can put towards your paid up additions. What are you going to do with the 50? To me, I just put it toward my paid up additions. And the reason is because I have limited window of opportunity for that paid up addition to be paid. And every time I put money into my paid up additions, my bucket just got bigger. The money I have in my cash value that's going to grow, whether I loan against it immediately or not, that money is now in that larger bucket, compounding and building for me. On the other hand, if I had paid the 50 towards the loan, either way, I've created more loanability in my policy, but my bucket didn't get bigger. My loan just got smaller that I have against.
Did you say loanability, like one word?
I
like it.
did.
Yeah. I think we're going to coin it, Rod. You get more cash in there, you have more loanability. I like it. Okay.
Sweet. No, so that's the way I generally approach it. If, like I've had conversations with people recently, if that loan, that $100,000 loan that I have there is represented by now defunct investment, I might approach it differently, right? And so I had a conversation recently with a client who is in this exact situation, has cash, wants to put it in the policy, trying to decide where to put it. Before talking, he was just going to put it all towards the loan. That just feels better. He feels less bad about the situation.
Right. Because you don't have the compound interest part of it. And that feels good, at least as a starting point.
Yeah. Now to that point, I absolutely want to make sure I'm paying the interest on the loan. If my interest is now due and I have the 50,000, I'm going to carve off some to pay to the interest if it's due at that moment.
Okay. That's an important clarification. And I meant to go to that right in the front. So just for clarity, number one, we always pay interest on loan to keep the interest from, compounding, right? Yep. And so that's kind of our non-negotiable. And so then the next point is, do I pay the loan back? And again, I'm just clarifying it for everybody here. Do I pay the loan back? Again, not the interest, the loan back, the principal, or do I put the PUA? Yeah, the principal. Yep. Thank you. And of course, to your point, what we're suggesting is we usually recommend funding the paid up addition first because it's what really drives the entire engine. And we want to keep the capacity open to be able to continue to do that. And so one of the challenges is that if we don't fund for long enough, then we can, to your point, lose that ability to do it. And as long as we pay the interest on the loan, it doesn't have any negative impact on our policy. Zero, zilch, none. We don't have to have an impact at all. So anyway, those are kind of the important reasons why.
So for this client's example, because the loan represented a defunct investment, again, he was just going to pay it towards the loan and just feel better about that. But after talking about it and talking through exactly what we're saying here, it's a bigger bucket over on the PUA side, et cetera. He still felt like he would feel better about paying some towards the loan, but still wanted to put more towards the paid up additions. So hopefully I'm not getting too confusing in my answer because they're two completely different scenarios. In a normal, healthy, everything's going well environment, I'll put it towards the paid up additions first, all of it. Pay that all up first before I'll move back over and start paying towards the principal of the loan. And then I was given another scenario of this client where they were actually in this scenario. And now it becomes at least a question mark. Should I pay some towards the loan because that investment went belly up? And again, it's an individual decision. That's what we decided to do.
A lot of it is having to do with your ability to continue to fund the strategy as a whole.
Yes.
Again.
Yes.
Right. So that's the core of the issue. If suddenly it's blown up to the point where I am no longer able to continue on the same strategic journey that I had created, then I have to reevaluate everything. But to the extent it's just a blip in the radar, like one investment deal that's gone bad, again, that takes us back to this idea of using the investment optimizer as your foundational asset, and everything else is revolving around that, being optimized by it. But we're also using the flexibility and liquidity inside the investment optimizer to make them not just optimized for return, but to make sure they're optimized from a safety standpoint.
Yep.
And it can do both of those things.
Yes.
Okay, Rod, did I give you enough time to
I think so, yeah.
tackle all of that?
I hit on everything.
Okay, well, I know this has been a detailed episode and we've gotten into kind of a lot of nuts and bolts, but I just felt like it was important because we do typically make the assumption that investments are going well. And again, I hope for most people, investments are going well. And I think they are, but we always have to go in with eyes wide open and know, what do we do in case of XYZ situation? And so again, another shout out to Wayne for bringing this to the table. I think is a really great topic. Rod, thanks for shedding light on the information. And thanks everybody for listening to us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.